Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, a forward-thinking leader who modernized a vast empire, or a ruthless autocrat who expanded her power at the expense of her people? Her reign remains a subject of intense debate. She corresponded with Voltaire, expanded Russia's borders, and initiated legal reforms. Yet she also presided over a brutal system of serfdom and repressed dissent. This video will examine her actions, dissect her policies, and offer a balanced assessment of her place in history. Born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729 in Prussia, the future Catherine II's path to the Russian throne was far from preordained. Her marriage to Peter, the heir apparent, brought her to the heart of the Romanov dynasty. Yet Peter proved to be an unpopular and ineffective ruler. He alienated the powerful Russian Orthodox Church and the military elite with his pro-Prussian policies and perceived incompetence. Catherine, on the other hand, immersed herself in Russian culture, learned the language, and cultivated alliances within the court and military. Seeing an opportunity amid growing discontent, she orchestrated a coup d'etat in 1762, removing Peter from power. Days later, he died under mysterious circumstances. While Catherine denied any involvement, the shadow of illegitimacy would loom over her reign. Catherine called herself an enlightened absolutist, a ruler who embraced the ideals of the Enlightenment while maintaining absolute authority. Enlightened absolutism was a form of government in the 18th century in which rulers adopted some of the ideas of the Enlightenment, such as reason and individual rights, but retained absolute power. Her nakaz, or instruction, a document intended to guide the drafting of a new legal code, reflected these principles. She advocated equality before the law, the abolition of torture, and the separation of powers. However, the implementation of these ideals proved selective. Although Catherine convened a legislative commission to discuss reforms, it ultimately failed to produce a new legal code. Many of the proposed reforms were considered too radical by the nobility, who feared losing their privileges. The reality of Russian society, with its rigid social hierarchy and reliance on serf labor, presented a significant obstacle to genuine reform. Catherine's dependence on the nobility for control limited her ability to challenge their power. Although she corresponded with Enlightenment figures such as Voltaire and Diderot, these relationships were often more about projecting an image of enlightened rule than enacting fundamental change. She offered Diderot money when he was in difficulty, but ultimately implemented only a few of his ideas. Catherine's reign was marked by significant territorial expansion, achieved primarily through successful wars against the Ottoman Empire. Access to the Black Sea was a long-held ambition of Russian rulers, providing vital trade routes and naval access. Through victories in the Russo-Turkish Wars, Catherine secured control of Crimea and vast territories along the Black Sea coast. This expansion transformed Russia into a major power in Eastern Europe and reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the region. Her participation in the partitions of Poland further expanded Russia's territory westward. These expansions, while reinforcing Russia's power, also involved significant violence, displacement, and political maneuvering. The contradictions of Catherine's reign were starkly exposed by the Pugachev rebellion. Led by Yemelyan Pugachev, who claimed to be the deposed Peter III, the rebellion drew support from Cossacks, peasants, and other marginalized groups suffering under the yoke of serfdom. The rebellion exposed the deep social inequalities that plagued Russian society. Catherine responded with brutal force, crushing the revolt and executing Pugachev. The rebellion led to increased control over the peasantry and a strengthening of the power of the nobility. The promises of freedom and equality in the nakaz seemed a distant memory. The status of the serfs remained largely unchanged, and they lived in poverty at the whim of their masters. The reign of Catherine the Great was a complex and contradictory era in Russian history. She embraced the ideals of the Enlightenment, but maintained a system of serfdom. She expanded Russia's borders, but at the cost of war and oppression. She implemented some reforms, but failed to address the fundamental inequalities of Russian society. She was a revolutionary monarch who dragged Russia for the modern era, or a tyrant who consolidated her power at the expense of her people. What do you think?